So CoCo Gauff is a two-time Grand Slam champion, just winning the French Open. And here's why I think that she may never win another Grand Slam. So I know in the title I'm going to write why CoCo Gauff will never win another Grand Slam. Well, I hope she does prove me wrong. But in today's video, I'm going to talk about why I think she may never win another Grand Slam, except for another French Open. So let's get into it. So first off, if you don't like sharp perspectives, you probably shouldn't be watching this video or any of my videos. I like to give my observations that are relatively unfiltered and off the cuff while I'm stringing a tennis racket. So if you don't like that sort of content, then don't subscribe to my channel and maybe not watch this content. But please know that nothing I say is meant to be ever malicious against the player, unless it's someone like Nick Kyrgios, who I just think is a horrible human being. But for the most part, unless I think they're terrible people with bad character, it's never meant to be really malicious. So with CoCo Gauff, I actually have a really interesting story that I'll tell you at the end about meeting CoCo just a few months ago and something that she did. I first want to say I have always admired CoCo as a person. She's a class act, always has been. She's a great sportsman or sportswoman, and she always handles herself with class. But she has some incredibly technical flawed, or she has a very flawed game, in my opinion. And that's why I think she's always going to underachieve compared to what she probably should do in her career. She's one of the best athletes, if not the best athlete, on the WTA Tour. She's incredibly fast, and she has great athleticism, certainly on top of the women's game. But she may never win another Grand Slam. Now, again, I hope she proves me wrong at this year's US Open. And you might be thinking, why am I not saying Wimbledon? Because I think she has really no chance to win Wimbledon now or ever. And if she does, it's more of a state of the women's game and what the women's game is like today, because there are no true superstars in the women's game, and the women's game is very hit or miss in terms of the top players. Sabalenka is the most consistent these days, but everyone else is all over the map with their consistency. So anyone could win a Grand Slam, or anyone in the top 5 or 8 players could potentially win a Grand Slam. But I don't think CoCo may not win another Grand Slam, like I said, unless it's another French Open. And it has all to do with her stroke mechanics of her game being incredibly flawed, particularly the forehand. As many people, this is not news, this is not breaking news to anyone in the sport. I've done a video on CoCo Gauff's forehand being a mess, and it still is a mess. And you might say, how is it a mess since she just won the French Open? Well, that's a false indicator, because she won the French Open because she was able to mask some of her deficiencies at the French Open simply because the court is slower. So if you have stroke mechanics or technical flaws in your strokes, a clay court will mask those issues, being slower. The court is so much slower, and CoCo has a tendency to be very late on her forehand with a giant swing, and usually off of her right foot and lunging and stepping into the ball. It's incredibly flawed, and it's such a problem. But because at the French Open it's on clay, she got away with it. And because she hits with so much spin, and sometimes it gets so sloppy, it actually is hard for other players to handle. Now, she still made a lot of mistakes on the forehand, but it was fewer, and it caused her less problems because she knew she wasn't going to be as late as often. Now, her second serve is also a problem at times, but from what I see, that's mostly due to her forehand being off. When she starts losing confidence in her forehand, then she starts losing confidence in her serve. Sometimes it's the other way around, but I think most players can relate to this, is that when you really start having a stroke that gets in your head, the rest of your game can start to fall apart. And that's happened to everybody, and happens at the recreational level, and it also happens at the pro level as well, that when you start really losing a particular stroke in play, that the rest of the game suffers. And with CoCo, that usually starts with the forehand. But she was able to mask it because of the court being slow. Now, what you're going to see coming up, so some people might say, well, she solved some of her problems, or might think that she solved some of her problems because she won the French Open. That's not the case. Nothing has changed technically or stroke mechanically with her strokes. The same problems that she's been having for the past 2 years on her forehand are going to continue to be there. And you're going to see it at Wimbledon. I would not be surprised if CoCo loses early in the tournament, just because her forehand is not going to be able to handle that little extra pace and the ball sliding on the court. You're going to see her encounter the same mental issues or mental challenges with her forehand and physical challenges with her forehand as she has in the past. And then that leads us to the US Open, which she has won before. So can she win it again? Yes. Do I hope she wins it again at some point? Yeah, why not? But I don't think she probably will. Again, I think there's a chance she could, but she probably won't, in my opinion, just because of how flawed her stroke and strokes are, again, particularly on the forehand. So that's my thoughts on CoCo may never win another Grand Slam. Now, if she does win another Grand Slam, it's most likely to be the French Open again, because she gets a little bit of extra time. That swing is so big that she can overcome that hurdle. Now, she won the US Open before, so she could win it again. I'm not saying she can't, but I think if she does, it's going to be, not say a gift, but the other players are not going to be playing that well. Because even in the French Open final, which was very windy, and Sabalenka did play terribly with, I think it was 80 unforced errors or more, that was part of the reason why CoCo was able to win the French Open. So if she wins another Grand Slam, unless something dramatically changes, it's going to be because she has a good, favorable draw, and the other players she encounters are not playing that well either. Because of her athleticism, she has such athletic gifts in terms of her speed, and her backhand is rock solid, that, you know, she just has so much athleticism she can overcome in the women's game today, again, because there are no superstars. I mean, the last women's superstar was Osaka, and I wouldn't say that's a global superstar, but for the most part, it was Osaka who was relatively a global superstar. And before that, it was Serena, who was able to dominate play oftentimes. But since then, there's certainly no superstars in the WTA Tour. And some people from Belarus or Poland will say that's not true. Sabalenka's a superstar, and so is Iga. They're not. They're regional superstars based in their countries. They lack some personality and game style and whatever those X factors are that make you a superstar. They certainly don't have them. And I would think that in today's game, the only one that potentially could be a superstar is CoCo. But even then, she's pretty mild-mannered. She's very reserved. And while she's a tremendous athlete and she has the benefit of being from the United States, which certainly helps in terms of your marketing. But I don't see CoCo being a long-term superstar, mostly because her game just is never going to get dramatically better unless she goes through some sort of revolution in her game, which I think is going to be very hard to do even at her relatively young age. So that's my thoughts. And now a quick story on CoCo. Again, like I said, she's a class act. I've always known she's a class act. You can just tell people's character and how they handle themselves. But this past March 2025, when I was at Indian Wells, I happened to meet CoCo for about 10 or 15 minutes. We were picking up food at a Thai restaurant near Palm Desert, and CoCo and her mom came in and we were waiting with them for a table. We were waiting for pickup, and she was waiting for a table. And my buddy says, I told my buddy who was with me, who's not a super informed individual in terms of tennis knowledge, and I said, hey, that's CoCo Gauff right there. And he's like, are you sure? I said, yeah, that's CoCo Gauff. And his wife loves CoCo. So I told him, I reassured him that it was CoCo, and he approached her and said, hey, listen, CoCo, my wife loves you. You're her favorite player, blah, blah, blah. And CoCo was super kind. And the first thing CoCo did was say, why don't we give her a call? Why don't you FaceTime her right now? Because his wife was back at the house, which we were staying in an Airbnb. And he didn't ask for an autograph. He didn't ask her to do anything. Within 10 seconds of saying hi, she's like, let's give her a call and say hi. And so she takes his phone. Well, he dials the call, calls his wife. And on the other end is CoCo Gauff. And she says hi. And my friend's wife was crying and couldn't believe it, that it was CoCo Gauff on the line. And they were all laughing. And, it was hilarious. And it just shows the class. I'm sure she's done that many times before. And I certainly didn't want to bother her, but my friend didn't give a shit. He just said, listen, I want to meet her. I want to say hi. And then after we got off the call, we just sat there for about 5 or 10 minutes, talking to her a bit longer. And both her and her mom were incredibly nice. In the middle of the tournament, they're going to a Thai restaurant. A couple other people, after we sort of were making a commotion, came up and said hi. But we just talked briefly. And again, you just can't, you hate to bother people when they're trying to enjoy their night out. And certainly weren't trying to, nor did I want to interrupt her. But like I said, my friend didn't really care. And they just handled it with super class, like you'd expect, and like she always has done. She doesn't buy into any of the negativity. And while I am very critical of her game, and I have been in the past, I'm certainly not critical of her and never have been, and I doubt ever will be. So that's my thoughts on CoCo, and that's the story about meeting her in a restaurant this past March. But I think there's a really good chance that she'll never win another Grand Slam. But of course, there's a pretty good chance she will, just because of the state of the WTA Tour and how good of an athlete CoCo is. So that's my reflections and observations on CoCo. What do you think? Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? It's a good chance I'm going to be wrong on this one, so it's not necessarily a prediction. I'm just giving you my thoughts on how flawed her stroke mechanics are, that it's really going to be problematic for her throughout her career. These things tend not to get better sometimes when you're not actively trying to fix them. And from what I see, there's not any adjustments really happening to her forehand that make me seem like this is going to go away. She's doing incredibly well. She's one of the top 3 players in the world. And, sometimes you're just too scared to make changes and you think it's going to make you go backwards. And hey, I get that. I can relate. Maybe she thinks with hardly any tweaks, she'll do better, but I don't think so. So that's my thoughts. If you like these observations and these types of videos, please remember to like and subscribe and comment. Let me know if you feel the same or you think I'm completely off base. That's totally fine as well. And that's it for today's video, and I'll see you in the next one.